Hello, everyone. Now that I have had some time to think about the entirety of Season 7 of Star Wars The Clone Wars, I was thinking I would rank all 12 episodes from worst to best. So I would also like for you, after this ranking is over, to make your own ranking down in the comments. Let's have a discussion about this. That would be really fun. I loved this season. This season was awesome. However, it did dip the slightest bit, and I already made a non-spoiler review on this season, which you should totally check out, but if you haven't already. So here is the spoiler review, which I'm mixing in with this ranking, and I'm going to talk about specific things that happen during this ranking. So be warned, this is a very, very spoilery heavy video, so be warned about that. So here we go. We are going to start off in 12th place, episode 7, the episode titled Dangerous Debt. On its own, this is a pretty good episode, I'd say. It's still a good episode. I'd give it like a 7 out of 10. And on its own, it's a pretty great episode. There's a lot of cool moments in it. The action is pretty cool. Ahsoka's character, what she goes through, is pretty cool. There's a few lines of dialogue that are like super three-dimensional and to make this episode pretty cool. But there's one extremely massive problem with this episode. They start in jail, they spend the entire episode breaking out, and at the end of the episode, they're back in jail. So there's literally no point to this episode. There is some, like the slightest bit of development for Ahsoka's character, but it's not enough to make this episode worthwhile. During this episode, I felt like Dave Filoni needed to move on from this part of the series, and I don't know, it just felt a lot like filler, and it felt like this could have been like a 5-minute segment of another episode. So in 11th place is the episode directly after that, episode 8, the episode called Together Again. Again, it kind of felt like filler, except this time they were wrapping stuff up. So I would have loved if 7 and 8 were combined into one episode. That would have been way better. This episode also has a ton of cool moments and a lot of cool dialogue between Ahsoka and the sister characters that are new to this season. However, the best part of this episode is the teases towards Darth Maul and like all the Mandalorian stuff. That is the cool thing. So I was more excited about like the cameo stuff and the teasing stuff than I was about the episode itself. And I still like this episode. It's still a 7 out of 10, but it is definitely one of the weaker ones. But I'm glad that it had a finale of sorts to this episode. So it didn't feel entirely like filler because it ended. And I guess I just liked that it ended, even though I liked the storyline. In 10th place is episode 3, On the Wings of Kiridax. This episode is the first great episode in this list, an 8 out of 10. The action is really cool. The character moments are really cool. However, again, it kind of feels a little bit like filler. I feel like the problem is they decided to split the arcs into 4 episodes. So there's 12 episodes and it's 4 episodes per arc. So there's 3 arcs. That works for the final arc just fine. But with the first 2 arcs, it doesn't work at all. It feels like it should be 3 episodes or even 2. But this episode is still really cool. I love everything with Anakin's character in this episode. In ninth place is episode 6, Deal No Deal. Again, this has some really cool dialogue. It probably has the best script in the Ahsoka plotline from episodes 5 through 8. There's a lot of cool three-dimensional stuff, and this is where I actually started to care about the sisters' characters a little bit. So I like that about the episode. Another cool thing about this episode is the storyline that it starts. I like this whole Pike Syndicate thing. However, it's a shame that the resolution to the storyline isn't quite as great as I would have wanted it to be. In eighth place is episode 2, A Distant Echo. I have trouble placing this episode in the list because it is near the exact quality of another episode. So I guess things that bring this episode down a little bit is the lack of droid comedy. A later episode I'll talk about in this video had some really cool droid comedy in it, and I love the return of that. But this episode is kind of void of it. However, this episode is really strong and is still great because of how it treats Anakin's character and wraps up some stuff. And it also adds this mystery element because it introduces this plot line about a missing clone trooper, Echo. So that I really like this Echo storyline. It starts it pretty well, in my opinion. And the thing about Anakin's character is, more specifically, it's a resolution between the plot lines between Anakin and Padme. I usually don't like the Padme episodes, but the way that Padme is included in this episode is really cool, and I love the dialogue in it. The best part of this episode by far is the scene where Anakin and Padme are talking to each other in private. I love that about this episode. That was really cool. In seventh place is episode 4, Unfinished Business. I really like where this episode goes. I love how it ties a bow on all the Separatist plot lines and ends a lot of the plot lines of the Separatist generals. I also love the resolution to the Echo arc. This new version of Echo is really cool. I'm not the biggest fan of bringing people back from the dead, but this new version of Echo is different enough that I'm totally on board. This Echo is super interesting, and I love the character interactions that he has with other characters. And I specifically love how some characters are in support of him, but other characters are doubting him, and they think that something's going on. They think that the Separatists and Sith got into his head and changed him. So that creates a super crazy dynamic that I love about this episode. Another thing about episode 4 that I love in this episode is how it treats Anakin's character. Like I briefly said earlier, but now I'll go more into detail. Basically, he does something to a general. He force chokes a general and cuts off one of his fangs or whatnot. That's really cool. And why it's cool is because it introduces the dark side part of Anakin, and it foreshadows that, and I love that about this episode. In sixth place is the episode 5, Gone with the Trace. I love this episode. It's a really, really cool episode. It's the first episode in Ahsoka's storyline with the sisters. And what makes this episode better than the other 3 in this storyline is just the novelty of Ahsoka returning. And I love seeing where Ahsoka's character has ended up. This new version of Ahsoka is really cool and interesting. And the dialogue in this episode is great. It re-explores the It re-explores the underworlds from the end of season 5. It doesn't do it quite as well, but it still does it pretty well. And I love seeing the underworld again, but in way better animation. In 5th place is episode 1, The Bad Batch. The biggest things about this episode are the clones and the droids, and of course the animation. Let me just talk about the animation first. The animation is absolutely stunning. This animation makes me wish that the other 6 seasons were remastered. However, that would never happen because that would cost so much money, but I would love to see that. The animation is absolutely stunning. And the cinematography is beautiful. The lighting is amazing. It's all awesome. The Bad Batch I would give a 9 out of 10. But why not a 10 out of 10? And it's for the one simple reason. One of the members of the Bad Batch I don't like too much. It's the big one. I don't think his comedy works all that well. He just felt like an unnecessary character, and a lot of his lines were like super cringy. So I didn't really like that about him. But the rest of the Bad Batch, I love. They're great characters. And I guess talking about the clones in general, this episode brings together all of the things that are great about the clone episodes from previous seasons. The clone episodes aren't my favorite, but this one combines everything I like about those episodes into one episode and makes it awesome. And the action is intense. There's so many cool stakes. And the last thing I'll say about this episode are the Separatist droids. The first 3 seasons are really cool with the Separatist droids because there's a lot of comedy in the show, especially from the Separatist droids. Their lines are hysterical, but later seasons got rid of that for a better tone. However, this episode, the droid comedy returns, and it is absolutely hysterical, and I love that it returns. In 4th place is Victory in Death, the final episode of the season. I love how this episode ends. It's a great ending. However, I feel like this is the worst episode of the last arc of the series. I kind of wanted a little bit more, but nonetheless, it is still a 10 out of 10 episode. I love how small scale it is, but at the same time, I would have liked to see a little bit more Revenge of the Sith stuff, but I love how it focuses on Ahsoka and Rex. That is really cool. There's some cool action, some cool ways that Ahsoka uses her lightsabers. And this episode, along with some of the other episodes in this season, really show how far Ahsoka has gone. And now she is like an amazing character. One of the best in the series, one of the best in Star Wars history. And a cool thing about this episode that's also prevalent in one of the other episodes is it feels like Mandalorian episode 6. It has that kind of vibe to it. And I like that a lot. And it also reminded me of my favorite episode from season 2, Brain Invaders, in a way. So that's really cool. Of course, the biggest thing about this episode is like the last 5 minutes of it. There's some really cool dialogue between Ahsoka and Rex that really builds on Ahsoka's character. Like, Ahsoka is not willing to let the clones die, even though the clones don't care if she's alive or not. And I just really like that. She's no longer a Jedi, but she's the purest of the Jedi. And it shows that. That's really cool how it does that. And of course, the final scene that is spectacular, the Darth Vader cameo. That is really, really cool. I love how this episode ends. And specifically the shot with him looking at the that bird who is the embodiment of the light side, and for a split second you can see Darth Vader's eyes returning to normal. And I would have just loved to see what he was thinking while holding Ahsoka's lightsaber. And this episode makes me really want a small mini series following Darth Vader after the events of this episode. That would be super cool.
I took care of them. They're good as new.
In third place is episode 9, Old Friends Not Forgotten. This episode has a lot of really cool action. However, the biggest part of this episode is the reunion between Anakin and Ahsoka. I love this part of the episode. The script is absolutely top notch. Everything about this episode is top notch. It's another 10 out of 10 episode. And I just love everything about this episode. I love what it means for the series. It was just a dream come true episode, and it's not even the best episode of the show, or like not even the best episode of the season. So the season climbs even higher, and that's just crazy. That's insane. The coolest thing about this episode is this scene where Anakin is presenting Ahsoka to her group of clone troopers who have painted their helmets orange in honor of her. This scene was super powerful, and it becomes even more powerful and heartbreaking once you watch an episode later in the show.
Shoot the blast off! Now!
In second place is episode 11, Shattered. Like I said earlier with episode 12, this episode has major Mandalorian Season 6 vibes, but that's by far not the coolest part about this episode. The coolest part about this episode is the way it uses Darth Maul. Darth Maul is an absolute badass. It's crazy. And I love the dilemma between Ahsoka and Darth Maul in this episode. Ahsoka doesn't want to free Darth Maul because she doesn't want to work with them. However, she has to in order to cause a distraction to get out of the situation. Of course, I love how this episode flips on its head when Order 66 happens. And one of the coolest parts about this episode is Ahsoka having to race against time to try and get Rex back to normal. That is crazy. The stakes are insane. I love this episode. But of course, it is not my favorite.
I will help you. But you must answer one question.
You have but to ask.
What do you want with Anakin Skywalker?
My favorite episode is episode 10. This is first place. Episode 10, The Phantom Apprentice. This is the best that Darth Maul has ever been. This is the best that Ahsoka has ever been. It's hard to say if it's the best that the show has ever been, but it comes really, really close. I'll have to rewatch The Wrong Jedi just to make sure. But I'd say this comes extremely close. I love this episode. Everything about this episode. The action is intense. I love how it flips back and forth between the Siege of Mandalore plotline and the small fight between Darth Maul and Ahsoka. That is really cool. And the biggest part about this episode, of course, is the fight between Darth Maul and Ahsoka. Holy cow. The script in this episode is absolutely insane. It is the best script that's ever been written for anything Star Wars related. It is ridiculous. I love Darth Maul's perspective in this episode, and I love the comparisons he makes between him and Ahsoka. I love that he says that him and Ahsoka are one and the same because they are outsiders and felt betrayed by their own order. Because, of course, Darth Maul was used by Darth Sidious in season 5, and Ahsoka left the Jedi Order due to hypocrisy. So I love that there's comparisons between the two characters, and the biggest moment of the episode is when Darth Maul nearly convinces Ahsoka to join him. That part was ridiculous. It was jaw-dropping. The ending of season 5 might still be my favorite moment in the show, but this is definitely a close second. Another big thing about the scene is its comparisons to The Last Jedi. It's very clear that Dave Filoni loves The Last Jedi because this scene is a mirror of it. However, I feel like this scene is like way, way better. The stakes are higher, the emotional attachment is higher, the dilemma between the characters is better, and of course, this episode ends with one of, if not the best lightsaber fight in all of human history. I love this episode. This episode changed my life. I was shaking. The end was insane. I love this. I really, really hope that Dave Filoni can make something as great as this again. So, that is my thoughts on all 12 episodes. There's my ranking. Please tell me your ranking. I'm so curious to hear what you have to say. So that is it. Please subscribe and like and all that stuff. And alright, bye.